Hi, how you doing? I'm Aaron. Violet's going to help me out today. Welcome to my kitchen. Today we're going to do beans and rice, which should be a lot of fun. I really want to spend time with you guys on dried beans because they're really affordable and they're really delicious. And I think that they're a thing that doesn't take that much time to make, but you have to have a lot of time available, which is sort of a consistent theme here. I think as a lot of us are at home, it's easier to cook in older ways. Things that you have to set up the night before, things that you let cook for a long time. They don't require a lot of active effort, but you have to be around. So beans are definitely one of those things. We eat beans how many times a week do you think?
5.
Maybe, yeah. It varies a little, but we eat beans a lot. We love them. We should probably talk a little bit before we start making the beans about where to get them. And if you don't have any, grocery stores generally have dried beans. Sometimes those are really old. And if you can, Charlie Bear is a farmer in Maine who grows beans, and we're going to be using some of his beans today. We talked to him. He's taking mail orders, but he doesn't have a website, so you have to call the phone number and you can place an order. And his beans are awesome. He also is distributed to some of the shops in this area, and I love his beans. They're really great. There's another source for beans called Rancho Gordo that is on the West Coast, and they specialize in heirloom beans. And we'll talk a little bit more about some different varieties of beans, but you can work with anything. You can just go to the grocery store and get some black beans or pinto beans or navy beans. If you get a chance to work with some of the heirloom beans, they're really beautiful in terms of how they look, and they also bring all different flavors and textures and a lot of fun. And even the most premium, most fancy heirloom bean is going to be pretty affordable. So we'll do beans and we'll do rice. I thought we should get the rice cooking first so that it can be all done by the time we're making the time we finish the beans. So let's get started on that first. What we usually do in our house for rice, you want to show people how we usually make rice in our house?
Yeah. We have this.
So we have this Zojirushi rice maker. I was trying to remember when we first got it. I think it was before I started Clover. And we actually made up a batch of rice here. So I opened it up and it's steaming. But this is a rice machine, and it does a wonderful job. It says neural fuzzy. It has some sort of logic that it uses when it's cooking. And if you have one of these, you probably know how to use it, and there's not a lot to it. You can set it up to cook right away. You can set it up to cook at a later time. It's really handy. If you don't have one of these, fear not, you can still make rice. Thought we would do, let's see, we'll just do a white rice today. We'll do this one here. So this is a medium grain white rice. And there are a lot of different methods for making rice. We're going to do something today where I'm going to teach you the recipe by how far the water is above the rice instead of teaching it to you by like number of cups of water in rice. That may sound a little bit confusing, but there's a reason for it, which is all the rice in the United States has like powder added to it. So there's a rule. People have to fortify the rice when they sell it to U.S. And if you have a nutritionally deficient diet, then that fortified powder can help you. But if not, it can affect how the rice comes out, how delicious it is. So you can start out with washing the rice. And if you come over and see this, the water's sort of cloudy. This is a very important step for sushi rice. If you want to make good sushi, you have to rinse the rice. It's really hard to get your texture right otherwise. We're not making sushi, obviously, so I'm not going to do a super thorough washing here. But you can see some of that coming off. And now as I fill it up again, it's going to be more clear. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to go crazy with this rinsing. I'm going to clean the rice a little bit before we cook with it. We talked a bit yesterday about water as an ingredient. That would be true here too. So if your water out of the tap doesn't taste very good, you might want to use something else when you're cooking with it, because whatever flavors are in that water are going to be in the rice at the end. This sink has a filtration system, so the water coming out of that tap is already filtered for us. But if you didn't have that, you might want to use a Brita water filter or something like that, so that your water's tasty. Now, at this point, let's see, maybe I can hold it up here. See, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shake the bowl a little bit so that the rice is even, and then I'm going to fill it up so that the water comes up about an inch, a little less than an inch above the surface of the rice. So this isn't a very exact thing, but one of my good friends taught me this method. It's like the one knuckle method when I was at MIT. And this is how I've been making rice since, if I make it on stovetop, although mostly we make it in that machine right now. So that's, take a little bit off. So that is, again, I'm just gonna make, you wanna just make sure that rice is flat. I'm gonna check that, so it's about this deep on top of the rice, which is great. And now we're going to bring it over to the stove top, and I'm going to put that on high right now. So what we're going to try and do is bring that to a boil, and that burner's clicking. Sometimes it happens, which is really annoying. Let's see if that one's... There we go. All right, so we're gonna bring that up to a boil. It's probably gonna take about 5 minutes or so. And once we see it bubbling away at a boil, we're gonna bring down the temperature. I'm going to add a few other things to this. So I'm gonna add a little bit of salt. This can be sort of to taste. We'll put, I will say, probably half a teaspoon of salt in this rice. But if you wanted it saltier, you can put more. You can also taste it later. I don't know if it affects the cooking very much. I've never noticed that. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of oil to it. There are a lot of methods of cooking rice where you add a little bit of fat, whether it's ghee or whether you add oil. And we're going to add a little bit of, or butter even. We're going to add a little bit of oil to this. I'm going to say it's probably going to be about a tablespoon of oil. And that will affect how the rice, the texture and the taste of it at the end. Sometimes we make rice without any oil at all. Usually in the rice cooker we don't use any. In this case we're going to have some black beans with the rice, and I think a little bit of oil in the rice will be really yummy with the black beans. So we're going to go ahead and put the lid on it, and the rice is now cooking. All right, should we move on to the next thing? You know, Violet, I forgot to grab onion. Do you know where those are in the basement?
Like, are they in the...
Yeah, it's like a big bag of them. You want to grab an onion? Thanks, sweetie. All right, well, Violet's going to get an onion. Let's talk a little bit about beans. So I've got a whole bunch of beans here just to show you guys. The beans we're going to cook right now are these ones, and these haven't been cooked yet. These have just been, let's see, if you can come over and catch that in the light. It's a really beautiful color. So these have just been soaked. And I don't know if it's coming across in the video, but they have this like opalescent purpley black to them. They're really beautiful. These are from Charlie Bear, and they are, yeah, they're just a really, really pretty color. They're a black bean, but they're a little more plump and round than a lot of black beans. Thank you, Vi. That's awesome. And here, Violet, you want to put your hand out? Let's show. This are, don't put your hand out. You can be the holder of the beans. These are called turtle black beans. So these are not yet been soaked. You can see what those look like. Yeah, just hold your hand steady there. So those are also black beans from Charlie Bear, but a different variety. And then I have here some of those that have been soaked, and you can see there's like a purpley black hue to the water. And these are the turtle beans. So Violet, hold your hand next to mine, so you can see those are the dry ones. These are soaked, and so they grow a lot in size when you soak them. And some people soak their beans overnight before cooking them. Some people don't. Some people soak them in the morning and then cook them at the end of the day. The dried ones, let's put the dried one right here. I soak more often than I don't, but I sometimes will cook from dry. One thing that's really interesting about beans, I didn't know this before Clover really, and I was starting to learn about sources for beans, and probably it was Charlie Bear who told me this. the beans that you buy in a grocer are often very old, and so we don't think of beans as having age or being a fresh product, but they cook best when they're less than 2 years old. So sometimes you may get beans and have trouble making them taste delicious, but it's not your fault, it's just because the beans are really old. These beans are usually less than 2 years old, and some of them are, a lot of them are going to be less than 1 year old. So that means they'll cook up more quickly, so you probably have less need to soak them. But you certainly can, and it does speed up the cooking a little bit. There are things I've read, articles saying that if you soak beans, you can get some of the gases removed from the beans if you change the water out often. I don't know whether that's true or how much of an effect it has. These beans are beans that, if you were watching the show yesterday, I put in here dried. And the reason I put these in yesterday is they're really a big bean. So these ones are from Rancho Gordo, and they're a really large bean. You can see them there. And I just thought it'd be fun for everybody to see a bigger bean and how much they can swell and grow. So when we put these in here yesterday, it was up to about here. Remember that, Vi?
Yeah.
And it's like a science experiment, just overnight. That's just sitting in water. They've filled up the entire area. And then I've got some other beans right here. These are chickpeas, and those are just a preview of something to come. I think we're not going to do we're not going to work with chickpeas today, but those are another bean. They're really different than these beans, the black beans and these scarlet runners, but they're also a bean. And they're a bean we use a lot at Clover. So we'll be doing some hummus and falafel at some point, which will be a lot of fun. I'll show you guys how to do an easy hummus that you can do at home, even if you have limited ingredients. And Violet, you grabbed these for me just now.
Yeah.
So do you remember what these ones are called?
Soldier beans.
Yeah, so these are called soldier beans. And there are soldier beans and navy beans. These are common beans for making Boston baked beans. So tomorrow we're gonna make Boston baked beans. If you don't have any soldier beans or navy beans, you can use other beans instead, but these are traditional to use for that. There are thousands of varieties of beans, and historically, most of our relatives, if you went back, ate a lot of beans. And definitely in New England, people ate a lot of beans. There are beans that are traditional to French recipes, special beans that are used for cassoulets. There are beans that are traditional for Italian recipes. We'll probably do something with cranberry beans at some point. We've got here pinto beans. Pinto beans also can work for making Boston baked beans. We'll play around with these at some point. Today we're going to be cooking up black beans, though. We're going to be doing these cocoa black beans. These are the ones that are like little opalescent pearls. And over here, we have some of these guys. So these beans, these did not soak overnight, but I cooked them a little bit earlier today, and I did that so you could see what they look like when they're done. And so in my hand, they're coming apart. If I look into the middle, it's not too hard in the middle, but they still have a really distinct structure and shape, so they're not blown out. If I had cooked them further, this one here is starting to fall apart. You can see that a little bit. The method for cooking the beans, getting it to this point, is you could soak them overnight or not. Either thing's okay. You're going to put the beans in water on the stovetop, and you're going to bring that water to a boil. And then you're going to do a hard boil on those beans for the first 10 or 15 minutes. This is like the best trick I can tell you about beans. And do a hard boil for 10 or 15 minutes, and then you're going to bring that temperature down to something very low so that it's barely bubbling at all. And then you're going to let it go for a while. And if you have a lot of time, you might bring it to a very low temperature and let it go for 2 or 3 hours. If you have a lot less time, you might bring it just below a boil and go for less long a period of time. There are other ways to speed up beans, pressure cookers, things like that can speed them up. But usually beans will take about an hour and a half minimum, an hour and a half minimum to get them to a really nice texture. And usually what you're trying to do is you're trying to cook them without having them all fall apart on you, because in a lot of cases, like what we're doing right now, we like to have a little bit of texture to that bean, and so we just want to make sure we don't overcook it. So starting out with that hard boil helps speed up, because at that point those beans are rock hard, they're not going to blow up. And then after that hard boil, bring it down and let them simmer, and you'll get to something like this. And so this is sort of the first stage of it, and we can. I think once we get some beans cooking, we'll take some of those dry beans and then bring it to a boil, and I'll show you what that looks like. But for right now, we're going to start cooking some to enjoy with the rice. So we have these beans here. These have already been. These ones weren't soaked, but you could have soaked them, and then we brought them to a boil. We cooked them until they got to a place. Do you want to taste one? Make sure they taste okay. So it should have like a little texture, but it's not too hard. It's like a little bit sweet. Do you think? It's like almost a little nutty, a little bit sweet. It smells a little bit like a bean. Oh, so that's the rice. Now we're going to bring that temperature down on the rice. So bring it down to a really low temperature. Okay, so let's go ahead and do you want to? We're gonna cut this up, and we're gonna we should need to put a little oil in here too. So let's put the temperature on that up. You want to pour some oil in there? So we're getting some oil in this pot. We're gonna put some onions in that oil, and then we're gonna put the beans in. This is a really simple recipe we're making. There's not much to it. That's great. So a couple tablespoons of oil. You see I've got some cast iron pots out here, and I've got a heavy pot here for the rice. These kinds of pots help you cook these things in a few different ways. One is they retain heat really well, so you don't have to put so much heat into them to keep them warm. So that's nice for when you're cooking things that take a long time to cook. The other thing is when you're cooking with cast iron, you get different kinds of cooking effects. So cast iron has really strong radiative heating, which is really cool. So there is thermal conduction, there's convection. So thermal conduction is like I touch something, it feels hot. Convection is like hot air moving around something, or water or oil. And there's another kind of heating, which is radiative heating, which you get a lot of from cast iron, where it actually emits like infrared radiation, and it cooks food. It cooks it a little differently. And so those are some things that are nice about cast iron. You can see we're going to cook the beans in the cast iron. The rice is also cooking in a, this is like a cast iron that's been enameled. All right, so should we get going on the onion here? So when I'm cutting the onion, I take off both ends like this, and then I'm going to make a bridge with my hand, and I'm going to bring the knife in between, and then I'm going to bring that knife blade down in between my fingers. And this gets me to a spot where it's relatively easy for me to get the skin off. And I have a little compost pot here. You want to take the skin off that one? Go for it. Nice job. And when you take the skin off, I was doing this right now, you want to get down at least a layer. You want to get to a place where the onion's going to look really clean, because as these age, and this onion was probably picked quite a while ago, and as it ages, it can get blemishes and things like that, so it's fine, you just peel past those. And then I'm facing the root side away from me, and I'm cutting it not all the way through, but most of the way through. So I'm making like a onion fan here, where it's still connected a little bit at the back side. And then I'm going to come at it this other way, and this lets me have nice little diced piece of onions without chasing the onion all over the place. Just get that very end root. All right. So, Violet, do you want to try and test to see how hot the oil is? So you can just pull one of the little onion pieces and throw it in there and see if it sizzles and bubbles. Looking pretty good. You want to put them all in? All right. And you want to get a wooden spoon and mix that around a little bit. Perfect. So here, you can do it with the mixing, Violet. So we're just cooking the onions a little bit right now. Get a little piece of hot oil get you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think just give it a good mix around in there. You got it? Yeah, let me help you out a little bit. Okay. So we're getting a little bit of, just a teeny bit of browning happening on some of the onions. That's fine. We're not going to get them really brown. We're going to look for what's often called translucent onions. And so we're going to look for a place. That one's getting translucent right there. This one is, these are still white. So we're going to get to that place where light comes through them pretty well. And if you had something to do other than being on camera, this might be you step away from it for a minute or two, clean a little something up, and then come back. You don't have to tend to this the whole time. But we're getting pretty close there where we want to be. How's it smell, Vi? Smells pretty good. Yeah. Seems like we start almost everything we cook with onions, and so knowing how to cut onions well can help you out a lot. Having a bunch of onions can help you out a lot. If you don't have onions at home, you could use oniony things, so things in that almond family. You could use leeks, you could use green onions, you could use chives, you could use garlic, you could use shallots. Anything like that would be a fine stand-in for this big white onion. You could use sweet onions, like a Vidalia onion. Any of those would taste fine here. So those onions are now at a really nice translucent stage. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick up our beans here, and we're just going to bring them on over. And I think, should we just make up all of these beans? Might as well, right? All right. So I'm just going to bring them all over. They have a little liquid with them, which I like. That's a good thing. And then you can see they're starting to heat up in there. We're going to add a little bit more water to them, not a lot. What's going to happen is some of the starch is going to come out of the beans, and it's going to thicken the water around them a little bit. So we're going to end up, what we're aiming for here is this is all going to get a little bit thicker, but we still want to have nice distinct beans. So we're aiming for that spot where we still have distinct beans, but the water around it's a little more thick. At this point, you can go a lot of different directions in terms of how you flavor these beans. We're going to keep it really simple. Beans love salt, and so they often take more salt than you would think they should. You want to get us a little spoon, Violet? Get a couple spoons so you can taste it, okay? All right. So let's get a spoon and get some salt in there. See if you can get a spoonful of salt to put into the beans. You're doing a really good job with everything. That's awesome. Yeah, we can start with that amount. So I think yes, go for it. So when we're getting this, I will really season this to taste. So we'll add some salt in, and then we'll taste it and see what it tastes like. And then we might add a little bit more salt. You generally, though, beans take a lot more salt than you think. They're sort of like tomatoes that way. They love salt. All right, do you want to take a little taste of it? It's a little bit hot, so blow on it. Is it salty enough or no?
I think a little more salt.
A little bland. I agree. All right. And this is a lot of fun. It's like magic because it's a little bit bland right now. When we get that salt to the right spot, it's just going to be super flavorful and taste delicious. We don't want to go so far that it tastes salty. Once you get to the place where you're tasting salt, you don't want that. So that's why we're gonna go a little bit at a time. Try that. Try to scoop it in there now. There you go. All right. I wouldn't put all of that in. Maybe half of that. There. Let's try that. Okay. So at this point, I think for this is about a pound of beans. Dry beans we started with. We probably are up to maybe a full teaspoon of salt at this point. We didn't salt the water when we were cooking the beans. I know a lot of people do that, and there's nothing wrong with it. I've always been able to get where I want in the end. If I were using the beans for a salad or something like that, I definitely would have salted the water when I was cooking them. All right, let's try it. Let's try again and see what it's like now. I think it's tasting really good. So a lot of that salt is still in the liquid right now. So a lot of what I'm tasting tastes really good as liquid. So we'll check it again before we eat it. And if you can see, the liquid now around the beans is already starting to thicken a little bit, just from the heat. And you can see that a little bit, how it's bubbling around those sides. This is a nice, I don't want it to get so dry that they're burning, but I don't need them to be like soup. And now we're gonna add a little bit of oregano. This, like I said, we're keeping this recipe really, really simple. At this point, it's just water and beans, onions and oil, and some salt. There's nothing else in this. But let's add some pinches of oregano. I think beans love oregano, and there you go. You want to put those in there? That looks awesome. Put a little more. Some last little bit. And dried herbs are fantastic. This one's super, super like beautiful smell. Very aromatic. These are also like beans. We don't think of dried herbs as being fresh, but if you get dried herbs, if you eat them within the first year or two, they're like full of beautiful oils, and they turn really green, and they're really delicious. If you get really old herbs, they can have almost no flavor, and they become a totally different thing. Okay, so we just mix that in a little bit. Smells really good, huh? Awesome. All right. So those beans are cooking away. We're probably going to bring the temperature down just a little bit on those right now. And that's all that we're doing to cook those beans. So let's go backwards a little bit. I have this pot free now, and I'll show you. This is what we would do to cook the beans in the first place. So I'm just going to clean these up a little bit. Which ones do you want to try and cook right now? I'll do some more black beans or the scarlet ones? You want to try those? All right. So what we're going to do here, we're just going to get the pot on some heat, and then we'll just bring this pot over, and I will pour out this water. I'm just putting my hand over it, and I'm just pouring out that water because the beans have been soaking in all that water, and we're just going to put fresh water on to cook it. Really big beans like this will generally take longer to cook because they're going to be a little more fragile, and you don't want to blow them out. So we're going to get them in there. We'll give them a hard boil to start, but then we're going to back it down and let it go at a nice low temperature for a really long time. So in terms of the amount of water, at this point you really can't have too much water, but we're making sure they're covered and they're floating just fine in there. We'll watch it as it gets going. Maybe I'll add a little bit more water in it right now. It's sort of insurance against having to watch it too carefully. Oh no. So we were setting up a second camera, and the kids told me, "Don't do that, Papa, it won't work." Blue told me this, and I said, "Oh, it'll be okay," but it fell down. The suction cup came off, I think because it got hot. All right, well, we've had a little tech problem with every episode so far, so still working. All right. It's okay. It survived. All right. Blue, you knew that would happen, didn't you? Yeah, I know. Well, we tried it. Well, we're gonna have to have some other apparatus then for bringing the cooking cameras up. So you can see I'm watching this a little bit. It's at a pretty high temperature, and so it's losing a lot of the water. You can see it in the steam coming out here. So it's thickening around the beans. This is getting to a really nice place. I like this a lot. I'm going to turn down the heat and we'll let that go. This one, on the other hand, is just getting started. This water's not hot yet. I have these really beautiful scarlet beans in there. But this is going to come to a full boil. Again, we're going to let it go at a hard boil for about 10 minutes right at the start, because right now these things are really, I don't even know if I can break one. They're really hard. So they're not going to fall apart right now because they're still so hard. So now's the time for us to cook them at a really high temperature, and then we're going to bring that down to a gentle temperature and let them finish out at a more gentle temperature. Now that the heat is down on this, you can see what it's like. It's still bubbling. This is the lowest heat this burner will do. So it's still bubbling, but it's not like a vigorous boil. And we can leave it at this for a little while. Cool. I'm gonna put a lid on it. When you're cooking things like this to boil them, lid can help keep some of the heat in, so you don't end up having to use as much heat as you would otherwise. And we're just about ready. So we're really at this point going to wait to combine this with the rice. Maybe I thought it'd be good to talk for just a minute about different types of rice, and then we'll come back and maybe make up a plate and try it out. Does it sound yummy? All right. So I just wanted to explain what kind of rice we were using here and how that might vary from other rices people might have. So this recipe, we will post this in the comments section below the video, so everybody will have a chance to check it out there. All right, and so I just wanted to, for people that haven't cooked a lot of rice at home, there's different kinds of rice, and so there's sticky rice, and my kids love sticky rice because usually when we get sticky rice, we make mango sticky rice, which is really, really yummy. And one of my early employees at Clover was from northern Thailand, and her family's food is all with sticky rice, and that's how they eat everything. And she gave me a cool bamboo rice cooker that's made for making that kind of rice. And so we pull that out and we make sticky rice sometimes. So this is like a lot of northern Thai food will use this kind of rice. There's other rices that have higher gluten contents as well. In Japan, like mochi is made of like more what's called the glutinous rice. There's actually no gluten in it. It's just called glutinous because it's sort of, I probably look to Europeans like bread, like gluten in bread. And then there's so that's like a kind of rice in its own, and it's got some specific uses and specific ways to cook it. You would definitely want to soak this overnight. You have sushi rice, and sushi rice are typically like a very precisely polished rice. So it's usually white rice, and it's usually a short grain rice. So these are like on the short end of the spectrum, and then you have medium in the middle, and then long, and so this can describe like the shape of the rice itself. So you know, if the short rice might look a little bit like that, the medium one might be a little bit bigger, and then the long rice might be more like this. And so over here you'd have like a basmati rice, for example, and then in the medium you might have like a Carolina rice. The one we were doing today was some sort of a Californian rice. I don't even know what they called it. It was like a name I hadn't heard, Kalak something, but it was it's a medium grain white rice. Right now up here we've got, these are both Japanese, and this is a white rice. If you wanted to make a risotto, arborio rice would be like over here. So that would be a rice with a higher starch content, and then the long grain rices though would be more like a basmati rice, And today we're in this zone. We're making this like medium grain rice, but you could really use the method we showed for any of these. The method we did today would work for any long or medium grain rice. If it's a white rice, you would do about what we just did. If it is brown rice, you're going to want to put a little more water, and you're going to need to cook it a little longer. So we didn't go through that in detail today. Maybe a later show we could do that. The other kind of rice that we sometimes eat is wild rice. And Violet, do you know? I don't know if you do know this. Do you know what wild rice is? It's a little tricky one. It's called wild rice, but it's actually not even rice. It's not even rice at all. It's like seed. Do we ever talk about where wild rice is harvested? So wild rice is harvested on lakes. It's really cool. People go with boats and they actually knock it into the boat. And a good portion of wild rice we eat today is still harvested in pretty traditional ways. Part of why it tends to be pretty expensive. It's not a rice at all, even though it's called that, and you cook it in a different way. This one you just want to boil it. But there are lots and lots of different ways of cooking rice, which is a lot of fun because there's so many different cultures around the world that have loved rice and come up with really fun ways to eat it. I remember I was talking about the Thai rice, and Hat, who was an early Clover employee, she introduced me to the idea of when the rice is harvested. For her, it was really important. The rice felt very, very different for her if it was like a new harvest rice versus an older harvest, and based on the time of year it was harvested, which is a really neat idea and something that I don't think we think of very much as Americans. All right, let's come on over here and check how we're doing. So that looks great, just what we were aiming for. These are, it's getting hot, but it's not quite boiling yet. And our rice is probably getting really close. Should we make ourselves some little bowls and taste what it tastes like?
Sure.
Sound like a good idea? All right, why don't you grab, here, and actually, if you want to bring the camera over here, I have, I can show you guys the pickles we made yesterday. So, these are all the pickles we put up yesterday. And Violet, which ones do you want to try? Want to try these? Want to try these ones?
Sure.
Okay, we'll try these out. They're like a beautiful range of rainbow colors. And it's good to have the fridge open because I'll show you something like these chickpeas. These are already cooked. And you can see they're in a little bit of their liquid, which is called aquafaba, which is a really fun thing, but we'll deal with that another day. But these are cooked chickpeas. We can use these to make hummus. And I'm just going to put this jar, I've let it cool to room temperature, I'm just going to put it right in the refrigerator, and that will last in the refrigerator for a long time. So at that point, it's sort of like similar if I had canned beans, and I can just pull them out of a can.
How many bowls should I get?
Just 2. That's awesome. Unless Brick wants some. You want some? These beans have been soaked, but they haven't been cooked. But I could also put these in the fridge, and those can sit in the fridge like that for a while too. So if you started to soak beans and you weren't able to cook them that day, have no fear. You can just grab them. It looks so purpley; it's hard to even see the beans in there now. But you can just grab them and put them right in your fridge, and those will hold for a nice long time in the fridge too. All right, let's should we have some forks? All right, wash your fingers. And the rice on the back burner is probably about done right now. So what I would normally do is just turn off the heat and let it sit in its steam for a while. I'm going to open it up quickly just so you can see what it looks like. You ready for that? So if you look at it, there's no water on top of it anymore. The rice is like they're distinct kernels, but they have like a nice fluffiness to them. You can sort of see holes where the water was or where the steam's coming up. And then what we would do is let that sit for another 10 minutes with no heat, and that's going to be perfect. I think today we're going to rush it a little bit because nobody wants to sit around for another 10 minutes waiting for our rice to steam, I don't think. So we're just going to take a little bit of this rice. And this is going to be a really delicious meal. It's a really simple meal. And it's a very inexpensive meal. But it's going to be really delicious. And a lot of this is getting right the details and making sure you have enough salt in the beans. So you can see and working with really great ingredients. You can see how beautiful that looks. That's like just what we were looking for. Looks awesome. And we're gonna and this would be great with some greens, some kale, or collard greens. It'd be good with a little bit of hot sauce if you want something spicy. Val, what do you like to have with beans? Pickles. What else do you like to have with beans? Sometimes avocados.
Yeah, definitely.
Every once in a while. All right. So, I'll get you one more of these. I think they're gonna be pretty yummy. All right. So I'm just gonna turn these things off so I don't have to worry about them any longer. These are at a nice boil now. Actually, if you want to take a quick peek at those, these are my scarlet runners. You can see they're at a nice boil now. This is what we're gonna let happen for about 10 minutes. Awesome. All right, and should we have a little bite? And then if anybody has questions, I'm gonna open up the chat screen. If anybody's wondering about Brooke's phone, it survived the fall into the beans. But if you've got other questions about beans or rice or these pickles or anything else, I'm gonna pull up, I think there's a way I can pull up the feed and see, and I can see what questions you guys are asking. Smells really good.
Should some hot sauce.
Brooke's saying I should put some hot sauce on it. All right, we've got a little kitchen garden hot sauce. This one, you probably aren't going to want this one, but it is a pretty color on there, isn't it? The habaneros. Really good. Thanks for helping me make this.
I'm gonna have two.
So I'm just checking out if anybody had any other questions. Somebody said, how long can you soak beans at room temperature? You can soak beans for a really long time at room temperature. You would want to change the water. So generally like a 12-hour soak is totally safe. I think after that, if you're going to soak them longer, you probably want to change the water out. And then, as I did, I just put them in my fridge. If you're going to keep them longer than that, put them in the refrigerator just to keep the temperature down. Are there any other things people are wondering about? Any other questions we can answer? I think that's it for what I see here for questions. So we're gonna wrap it up for today. I want to thank everybody for joining. Tomorrow we're going to make one of my favorite things, which is Boston baked beans and brown bread. And this is a funny one because the beans will end up being in the oven and the brown bread will end up being made on the stovetop. So it's a really interesting bread. It's really, really yummy, and I love it a lot from my childhood. And it's a traditional thing to have it in New England on Saturdays. So my dad grew up, he was born in New Bedford, and his family, he moved to California when he was a kid, but his mom would make baked beans and brown bread on Saturdays, and it's a really neat tradition that lasted for a very long time. At this point, I don't even know where you go to get really great Boston baked beans, because it's one of those foods that's not fancy enough for restaurants, and so I think has been lost as people stop making food at home. But we're gonna have a lot of fun and make some brown beans tomorrow. If you want to follow baked beans and brown bread tomorrow, if you want to follow along, soldier beans or navy beans are great. Pinto beans can work fine. Really, bring whatever beans that you have. And we're also going to make the brown bread. So for that, you're going to want some flour and some cornmeal and some molasses. You're also going to need molasses for the beans. We have a more complete ingredients list if you would like to follow along home. And we'll see you guys back here tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.